Transcendence. Chapter 6. Auditions, Fears, and Dedications. Ouch! Scootaloo stood up from a rough landing and brushed herself off. Another trial and failure to complete a new trick Rainbow Dash taught her the week before. She looked up to the sky, where Rainbow Dash trailed her hooves down her face in frustration. Ugh, come on, Scoot! We've been working on this for days now. We should have been done with this move like yesterday. I'm running behind on my own practice for the Wonderbolts tryouts. Scootaloo frowned. It wasn't her fault making a tornado was so hard. So much of it she had to figure out herself, from the spin to the speed, not to mention timing. Still, joining the Wonderbolts was Dash's dream, and being the reason she might not make it this year was the last thing Scootaloo wanted. She lifted herself into the air for another try. The grassy meadow along the Everfree looked especially green from high up. It would have been something to appreciate had she the time to do so. Instead, Scootaloo shot downward with extraordinary speed. Wind rushed along her mane and down her body. It screamed in her ears, deafening, like the first time she learned to fly. A mock cone started to form, fighting back against her for daring to attain such speeds. Scootaloo felt its pressure and knew she was ready. She fanned and angled her wings like a propeller. The wind pressing against her sent her into a wild spin. Far below, the ground blurred, in a dizzying circle, bold, swirling greens and browns overpowering the finer details of the land. The mock cone twisted and contorted, bending to her will. Step 1 complete. Scootaloo squinted as she neared the ground, estimating her altitude and calculating her timing, for now was a test of daring and precision. If she halted or dived too early, she would be swept up in the vortex that she now channeled behind her and land in a rough, disoriented heap like last time. Too late? She didn't want to think about that. Only the thought of surviving this game of chicken swirled in her head, but even that she had to shake away for concentration on the immediate. The ground spiraled dangerously close. 50 meters. A lump of doubt formed in her stomach. 40 meters. The smearing earth seemed to lunge at her, and the lump shot to her throat. 30 meters. Not yet. She gritted her teeth and swallowed her fears. 20 meters. Now. Scootaloo flared her wings. They strained to their fullest against the wind. She spiraled heavily upon the grass and dug deep circles in the earth with the force of her spin, legs becoming rooted in place. Wings whipped awkwardly about in the wind, as it rent and tore at her hide like ethereal blades. Her eyes watered at the excruciating pain. As quickly as it came, the pain disappeared. A bellowing roar met her ears, and she looked up to inspect her handiwork. Just as Rainbow Dash had said, her spin had become self-sustained as a tornado. It sucked up chunks of dirt and grass as it carved a path through the meadow and into the Everfree, much to the terror of scattering birds. A giddy smile grew on Scootaloo's face. Excitement tried escaping in the form of a hop, but with her hoof stuck in the dirt, managed only an awkward wobble to keep from falling over. She pulled herself free of the earth and dusted herself off, before looking around for Rainbow Dash and the bright smile she would undoubtedly be wearing. Left, right, and around she looked, no sight of hide or tail to be found. Confused, Scootaloo looked up. High above, a small speck grew, along with a shrill cry. The speck grew to the point where it became recognizable as Rainbow Dash, tumbling through the air. Scootaloo tensed in alarm before dodging aside. Rainbow Dash crashed into the ground, plowing a small trench as she came to a halt. Clumsily she stood, wearing a groggy but pleased expression. I think it worked. She widened her stance for balance, legs wobbling like plucked strings, eyes spinning about in their sockets. But next time your two buddies there can't help you out. She collapsed in a heap. Scootaloo winced but couldn't suppress a giggle that worked its way up from her belly. Rainbow Dash always found a way to make her smile, even if unintentional. After a moment, Scootaloo helped her up, glad to see she wasn't injured. A quick shake of the head brought Rainbow Dash back to her senses, a faint blush on her cheeks despite the brave face she put on. That was a good one, Scoot. Nothing like what I could do. but I bet that one will go for a few miles. She visored her eyes with a hoof to watch it disappear over the treetops. Frenzied shouts and hollers of wildlife abound. She laughed. We should probably get going. Wouldn't want anything nasty coming out of there, would we? Not that we couldn't take it, though, right? A mischievous grin swept across her face as she turned to Scootaloo, who grinned back. Sure they could. Rainbow Dash could beat anything. Wings out and a yawn growing in her mouth, Rainbow Dash turned toward Ponyville. Come on, Scoot, let's get you home. Scootaloo nodded her agreement, and the two took flight. It was abnormally cool for a summer evening, though. She welcomed it after a long day of hard work. It kissed across her face and through her sweaty mane, letting her eyes droop half shut and a smile to form, in spite of her exhaustion. Many hours she had spent learning the steps to making a tornado, and many more putting them into practice. Not often did a week speed by so quickly, but it came with its reward, and with that reward etched into muscle and memory, Scootaloo looked to Rainbow Dash. Her smile widened. Hey, Rainbow Dash? Rainbow Dash blinked and shook her head, coming out of a deep half-sleep. What's up? Again, her tireless selflessness warmed Scootaloo's heart. Thanks. No problem, Squirt. Rainbow Dash smiled back, appreciation in her eyes. She looked down. Well, guess we're here. I'll see you tomorrow. With that, she split off and headed into the distance. Scootaloo watched until she had disappeared beyond sight, then sighed. She descended into a canter before her house, and opened the door with a weary hoof. Straight for bed she trudged. The feathery plush of her mattress was the most wonderful feeling her aching body could ask for. She sighed again, though this time in satisfaction. For a minute she lay listening, feeling the blood pound through her veins, and the dull throb of yielding muscle. When the mattress became too hot for comfort, she rolled over and found a cool spot, to again lay in faux unconsciousness. She stroked her back with a hoof, feeling where the wind had made its illusionary lacerations not an hour ago. They felt so real. Her wonder dissipated to make way for the utter exhaustion that continued to swell with every second of comfortable discomfort that came with the end of daily training. She rolled onto her side to find another cold spot. The exhaustion spread to her wings, so she stretched out her free one. A lot of good that did her, when a Charlie horse knotted down its length. She squirmed in response to the pain, until it finally relaxed to leave her in relative contentment. Another minute passed as she stared at the stucco ceiling, not knowing why she did so. It was too early for bed, not to mention she needed a shower. Celestia knew how bad she must have smelled at that moment. Scootaloo looked out her bedroom door at the prospect of heading for the bathroom. Was all that came forth before she looked away. Like that was going to happen. Instead, she looked at her dresser, where 5 medals, 1 bronze, 2 gold, and 2 silver, hung from its knobs. Many more were scattered about her room, crowding the few hooks and furniture corners present. 2 months to the day it had been since she first won a medal. It felt so long ago. Her eyes subconsciously lowered. For 2 months, Rainbow Dash had officially been a coach and mentor, but more than simply that. She was like family, was family. Scootaloo glanced at the photograph of Starshine, taken from her father's album, that was taped to the bottom corner of her dresser mirror, then quickly rolled over. Atop a nightstand beside her rested a tiny, 3-legged calendar. A date, June 26th, was circled in red crayon. She eyed today's date, the 18th, as it sat ready to be crossed through in the inevitable flow of time. 8 days until Rainbow Dash's tryouts. While there was no true age restriction on auditioning for the Wonderbolts, Rainbow Dash had decided that waiting for the standard entrance age of 18 would be best. She would be most ready now more than ever. Back at the circled date she looked, apprehension and excitement at war in her gut. If Rainbow Dash was accepted, it would be the happiest day of her life. What Rainbow Dash might not know is that it would separate them. Maybe she did know, even looked forward to it, their separation a necessary evil. Naturally, Scootaloo would share in her joy, but the fear of losing Rainbow Dash gnawed at her, like a rat at the bars of a cage. On the other hoof, if she didn't make the cut, they would be together for at least another year. But what would that do to Rainbow Dash? She never handled failure well. Truthfully, she never really had to handle it at all, but at the same time, Celestia forbid it happened. Could she? Scootaloo rolled onto her back to stare at the ceiling again, and sighed. Why did life always have to find a way to suck? She brushed clumps of fur on her chest up and down, watching them stand like little spikes with her sweat. Such idle motions were always calming, but sadly, they never made problems go away. What did was facing them, just like Rainbow Dash always said. That in mind, Scootaloo looked back at the calendar, at the circled date, then flipped the page to where another date was circled and underlined. July 15th, the Best Young Flyers competition. The idea zipped through her mind like the pegasi that would compete in it. She let a smile form on her lips as her hoof drooped to the side of the bed to let the page fall back in place. Her eyes closed, and she drifted off into a peaceful slumber, filled with open skies and streaks of violet. Lightning roared, violent and terrible, across a blackened sky, displaying its rage in massive bolts that split the heavens. Powerful it was, a thing to be feared, but Scootaloo tore past its rampancy. Upward she flew, teeth gritted, straight towards its lair in the monstrous clouds above. The wind rushed about her, wild in her ears, and the thunder's fury vibrated in her heart. She pulled into a loop, tucking her legs in before a bolt of lightning streaked across her belly to shred her Wonderbolt suit to ribbons. A crowd far below gasped, though was barely heard over another thunderclap. Scootaloo smiled, a little feisty. Scoot! Face to face with the cloud's underside she came, wings extended to graze against it and absorb the static within. Scoot! Rainbow Dash is here! Gravity pulled her downward, electricity trailing after her like threads sewn between wingtip and cloud. The ground rose with startling speed, but she remained calm. Almost there, pins and needles tingled through her muscles and spine, the sensation of lightning coursing through her, primal and wild, waiting to be unleashed. Dang it, Scoot! Get up already, we're gonna be late! Scootaloo's eyes shot open as something jabbed her in the side. She scrambled to her hooves instinctively, before realizing that her father and Rainbow Dash stood beside her bed, a glare of impatience on Rainbow Dash's face. A moment passed as Scootaloo pondered why she was here, then gasped. She leapt out of bed with a burst of energy, shook off the remainders of sleep, and gave Rainbow Dash a big smile. You sleep like a rock, her father said, then chuckled. Sleep well? Scootaloo nodded enthusiastically. Rainbow Dash groaned into a facehoof. Ugh, we don't have time for this, let's go! She stormed out of the room. Scootaloo followed in tow, but stopped in the doorway to look back at her father, a smile creeping onto her face as her dream bubbled to the front of her mind. He smiled back, whisking his hoof toward the door. Have fun. Come on, Scoot! Rainbow Dash yelled from the living room. Scootaloo smiled at her father a second longer, before racing for the front door, through which Rainbow Dash could already be seen leaping into the sky. She giggled at such impatience, but understood it well. It wasn't often she got to watch Rainbow Dash audition for the Wonderbolts. It was rather warm that morning, humidity from an overnight shower sticking to her like an uncomfortable shirt. Rainbow Dash seemed to pay no mind to it, her face set dead ahead, concentrated on what the day would bring. Scootaloo dared not interrupt. They flew in silence until they reached the outskirts of Philadelphia, just north of the Junior Speedster's track grounds. Scootaloo didn't know what to expect upon arriving, but the sea of colors as hundreds of ponies ran about far below certainly wasn't on the list. As they came closer, she could discern the makeshift stalls and carts strung throughout the grounds, their owners busy with the masses that flocked like herds of cattle from one to the next. Never before had she seen so many ponies in one place. Rainbow Dash descended, and Scootaloo followed suit. They landed amidst the general hubbub. Scootaloo shied away from a particularly large stallion trundling by, into Rainbow Dash's side. A wing wrapped around her protectively, and Scootaloo looked up to see a smile on Rainbow Dash's face. Quite the turnabout from her previous attitude. Kinda busy, huh? Scootaloo looked between her and the ponies about them, still nervous. Yeah, why? Ha! It's because the Wonderbolts tryouts went public like 10 years ago. She looked up to follow the trails of 3 wonderbolts overhead. And ever since, it just kind of turned into a market thing. I bet Applejack's here too. She wouldn't miss a chance like this to sell some apples. You're darn right I'm here. The 2 turned to see Applejack with her hooves crossed, her usual country smile present. No way we'd miss out on business like this. She trotted up to them. Apple Bloom and I got here at the crack of dawn. Couldn't believe how many folks got here before us. Scootaloo perked up at the mention of her friend. Apple Bloom's here? Applejack chuckled. Heh, well, of course she is. Ain't an apple if you can't sell apples, right? She pointed her head over her shoulder at a cart stand. Scootaloo could make out snippets of an excited Apple Bloom waving to her, through the many ponies passing between. We saw you flying in, so I figured I'd come say my piece before it gets too hectic round here. She turned her head and grinned. Dozens of customers gathered around her apple stand. Apple Bloom's waving now panicked. And that's probably my cue to get back to it. She turned back to Rainbow Dash, still grinning. Guess I better be wishing you good luck up there. We'll be watching. She winked. Rainbow Dash deflected her words with a cool smile, eyes half-lidded with a hoof brushing her chest. Ha! Thanks, but I don't think I'll be needing any of that. Applejack rolled her eyes. A loudspeaker crackled to life. Attention! Will all participating athletes please report to the southern field for the qualification race? Again, all athletes to the southern field for the qualification race. Rainbow Dash grinned. Ha! Not like the others even need to show up. She swaggered toward the field, confidence in her voice. A smile flashed beneath eyes alight with an energy desiring release. Time to show 'em why. Wings extended wide, body crouched low, and she launched skyward, those around her shielding themselves from the dirt blasted away in her ascent. When the dust settled, Scootaloo mouthed a whoa, gaping as Rainbow Dash was already a tiny speck in the distance. She had never seen so much power. Rainbow Dash really was the best flyer in all of Equestria, no doubt about it, and she would get to watch her prove it. A small fluffy cloud drifting overhead looked like an excellent vantage point. She shot upward and somersaulted over to land atop it. She snuggled into it. Clouds were always so comfortable. Legs sprawled, she peeked over the edge to observe the proceedings. About 20 athletes were lined up in a row. Some fidgeted. Others idly stretched hoof and wing. None looked as confident as Rainbow Dash, because, honestly, who could smile with such certainty at a time like this? Scootaloo giggled. A wonderbolt, it looked to be Soren from her cloud, stood before the contestants and blew a whistle before pacing back and forth. His lips moved to say words that couldn't reach Scootaloo's ears, racing instructions most likely. The contestants' gazes into the sky confirmed her suspicions. Naturally, Scootaloo also looked up, and her jaw dropped. Pillars and spirals and rings of cloud twisted and veered through tubes and tunnels and contorting arches. Rain poured between rotating thunderheads that crackled with lightning. Dense fog concealed the upper half of the course, a mystery to all those who enter. On your mark! The firm voice called Scootaloo's attention to a cloud not far from hers, where Soren stood, roof overhead, beside a dozen other wonderbolts. She looked down at Rainbow Dash, who grinned back. Set! Rainbow Dash gave her a slow salute, then crouched for takeoff. Go! A bell rang, and all racers fired into the sky, their collective launch resounding like a bomb. Through zigzagging rings they barreled, Rainbow Dash and 3 others already forming a pack ahead of the rest. The course took them high toward the fog, then looped back down through a long, narrow tube. Rainbow Dash and the others disappeared within. Seconds passed with no sight of them leaving the other end. A yellow mare was launched back out of the tube where she tumbled out, then dove back in. Scootaloo bit her lip, not knowing the happenings within. Suddenly, a bright red stallion burst out the bottom end, mane torn back against a powerful wind. Face strained, then surprised, as another blew him sideways with the force of a hurricane. Rainbow Dash quickly followed, but compensated. She flew into the massive headwind, letting gravity pull her down through, and, fast as lightning, straightened into a dive the moment she cleared it. Yes! Scootaloo shouted, unable to contain her excitement as Rainbow Dash took a clear lead. 2 others caught on to her maneuver, and both powered through as easily as she did, along with the light red stallion. Skyward they flew, quickly gaining on Rainbow Dash's heels. She craned her neck back to look at them as she looped through another ring. Her dive toward a corkscrew-shaped cloud on the far side of the course was slow, much slower than it should have been. Scootaloo put her hooves to her mouth. Halfway through the course wasn't the place to slow down. Nowhere was. What was she thinking? There had to be a reason for it. Rainbow Dash traced the inside of the spiral, disappearing and reappearing with every turn. The others hot on her tail. They came out the top neck and neck, growing extraordinarily fast, flying straight for Scootaloo. Scootaloo blinked, then turned around to see the next cloud marker straight behind her. She clenched tight to the cloud at the realization that she had drifted right into the middle of the course and beat her wings to push herself out of the way. The racers blasted past a mere second after, their backdraft tearing at hide and tail as she clung for dear life. Her cloud rolled like a ball until the wind died down to leave her sighing in relief. She looked up at where the tail of the third racer was disappearing into the fog. Shadows skimmed back and forth, becoming clear and obscure with every in and out of invisible obstacles within. Squinting didn't help Scootaloo see any clearer, but the deep bass of her heart in her ears forced her to. Rainbow Dash was in front. She had to be. Scootaloo stared at the final stretch of the race, a long straightaway that extended from the fog to the ground below, where ponies gathered around a finish line. Eyes shot back and forth between it and the fog, unable to pick out any forms within. Everything was quiet. A large shadow grew, racing for the straightaway. Scootaloo gasped. Rainbow Dash? The fog burst outward to form contrails behind Rainbow Dash and the light red stallion. They bumped and jostled for first, teeth gritted. Rainbow Dash pushed away from him, then looked at Scootaloo. She grinned. As if fired from the barrel of a gun, Rainbow Dash surged forward to leave the stallion in the dust, a mock cone starting to form about her. It sharpened like a spearhead, but went no further. She tore past the finish line. The cheering crowd made silent as it was blown off its hooves.
Yes!
Scootaloo shouted, somersaulting in a display of excitement. In the finisher's zone, Rainbow Dash alighted on the grass and cantered for the water cooler, as if out on a mid-morning stroll. After a quick sip, she looked up at Scootaloo, a devilish grin on her face. Scootaloo couldn't help but beam back at her. Rainbow Dash was so awesome. In time, the rest of the competitors crossed the finish. Many looked like they had flown around the world, but a few, Rainbow Dash most outwardly, looked ready for more. Those chosen to continue were led across a field by Soren, where he again gave them instructions that Scootaloo couldn't hear. This had to be the stunt part of the auditions. A giddy smile overtook Scootaloo, and she slid her cloud after the crowd beneath her. One by one, the contestants put on displays of agility and speed, grace and tenacity, power and endurance. Truly amazing feats they were. Scootaloo had never seen a cloud explode before, nor such realistic cloud crafting of the equestrian flag. It seemed to flap in the breeze. But Scootaloo knew none of them would match up to what Rainbow Dash had in store. She went last. Simplicity is the heart of grace, as Dad always said. And though Rainbow Dash loved boasting, the way she rose high into the atmosphere showed that she understood this idea. A tiny speck against the sun, she dove, body slim as an arrow. The crowd gasped, and so did Scootaloo. For the first time in her life, she would finally witness the greatest spectacle in history. Rainbow Dash's sonic rain boom. She held her breath in yearning of the inevitable. The mock cone formed around Rainbow Dash, again narrowing about her. Colors of blues and greens and reds swirled out from its white glow that pulsed at her outstretched hoof. The sound barrier bent against her assault, then exploded in an enormous rainbow. Scootaloo's jaw dropped, a tingling sensation in her heart and spine. A gust blew her over backward as Rainbow Dash barreled past, mere inches from her face. When she righted herself, a rainbow trail met her eyes, bold even in its residual power. Shakily, she reached a hoof to touch it. It floated away, weightless like stardust, to disappear into nothingness. Unbelievable. She followed the rest of the trail with her eyes, which looped into the sky, then back to the ground. The crowd went wild, but Rainbow Dash paid it no attention. She looked up at Scootaloo and returned her gaping smile with a sly wink. Two days passed in relative normality. Now used to waking at the crack of dawn, Scootaloo followed her training regimen to the letter. Morning practice, followed by crusading, followed by evening practice, followed by sleep. The third day after Rainbow Dash's audition began much like the others. She woke up and headed for the front door to get her morning flight out of the way, but upon opening the door, her routine changed. Rainbow Dash stood on the threshold, wearing a blue flight suit. Scootaloo gawked for a moment, gears churning to fully comprehend her devious smile. It clicked, and her gawking doubled. Words were unnecessary. Scootaloo tackled her in a hug, both laughing joyously. She had never been so happy in her life. Rainbow Dash did it.
I couldn't wait to come show you,
Rainbow Dash said.
I'm glad you're happy, Scoot.
Her eyes glowed with a soft light of their own.
It means a lot.
Gently, she tried to push Scootaloo off. For a moment, Scootaloo resisted, her heart jumping with the understanding of what would soon happen, but then allowed Rainbow Dash to stand. She frowned at her hooves, unable to look her in the eye without crying. Rainbow Dash shouldn't have to leave, or even want to. It was happening, just like she knew it would. She squinched her eyes shut to keep in a tear. A hoof lifted her chin to bring her face to face with Rainbow Dash. Her brows were furrowed in concern.
What's wrong, Scoot?
Scootaloo jerked her head away again to look at the ground, ashamed of crying in front of Rainbow Dash. Her voice came out choked.
I don't want you to leave.
The hoof stroked her mane and caressed down her ear to her cheek. It brought her eyes back up to Rainbow Dash, whose very soul smiled in her own.
Hey, this doesn't mean I'll be gone forever. You know I'll see you at Best Young Flyers.
Scootaloo sniffled, looking away. She was right, but it didn't help at all knowing she would be gone in the first place.
I just want to be with you.
A lump formed in her throat as tears threatened to blind.
I know it's hard, Scoot, but we all have to grow up.
The hoof brushed away a tear.
Can you do that for me?
Scootaloo's lip trembled, and she slowly nodded. Anything for Rainbow Dash. Anything. She smiled up at Rainbow Dash through her tears.
Of course. I'll grow up to be just like you.
Rainbow Dash laughed, soft and loving. No, you won't. You're not going to grow up to be some dumb old Rainbow Dash. You're going to grow up to be Scootaloo. The Scootaloo. The best flyer in all of Equestria. That did it. Scootaloo could take no more, and she hugged Rainbow Dash with all her might. Tears flowed freely.
I love you, Rainbow Dash.
She held tight, sobbing into the sleeve as if it were a lifeline. Rainbow Dash stroked her mane until the sobs died down.
Hey.
Scootaloo sniffled, wiped her nose, and looked up. Rainbow Dash again wore a soul-filled smile.
I have to go now, but just remember one thing for me. When you think you've got nothing left.
She nodded over Scootaloo's shoulder, directing her gaze to her father leaning against the doorway, smiling.
You do.
A gust of wind swept through Scootaloo's mane, and she turned back to see Rainbow Dash in the sky, grinning over her shoulder, hoof raised in farewell.
1 month!
Rainbow Dash yelled. She saluted before firing off into the distance. Despite the heaviness of her heart, Scootaloo couldn't help but smile. 1 month. She would be there, and Rainbow Dash better be ready.